Okay. Yeah, sit. I will sit. I will come and sit. I'll come and sit. Yeah, I will join. I will join later. I will join. Yeah, I will join. No, but I. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start. Thank you for being here. Okay.
Fast, do you know? Okay.
We have also online people attending online. Okay, very happy to be here in rather cloudy Barcelona. I would expect to see the sun, but unfortunately it's cloudy, but it's good. I'm from Belgium, so I feel at home with all the clouds. We still need a little bit of rain and then it's perfect. Okay, we have a fantastic program for this panel, an extremely interesting list of speakers in the panel, and as you know, it's hybrid, so there are also people listening at home, and also some of our panelists are at home at the moment. So they will join in, or they join in online, and then of course we have the people who are here in person. They are already sitting in the chairs. I will introduce them in a minute. The topic is green and sustainable PPP procurement, and I think this topic is spot on at the moment. And we are living in a world with a lot of challenges: social injustice, inequality, violations of human rights, climate change, loss of biodiversity as a consequence of the climate change, scarcity of raw materials, etc., etc. And I think one of the instruments to combat many of these challenges is, in fact, sustainable and green public procurement. Now, in green and sustainable public procurement, governments purchase works, services, goods with a reduced negative environmental and social impact. And of course, we all know that public procurement accounts on average for about 14 to 20% of the GDP of a country. So the purchasing power is really an important economic leverage we can use. Now, if you look at the current policy and the current sustainable best practices, they are very much focused on traditional public contracts, so on traditional public purchasing. And of course, we all know, we heard that this morning already many times, but we know that PPP is very different from traditional contracting. It's about long-term contracts, private finance, integrated contracts. So in fact, there is a huge gap in policy and research in best practices, and this is a missed opportunity. You can even say it's detrimental if we want to achieve the goals, also the SDGs, because PPPs they do offer huge opportunities to create green and sustainable projects. And one of the elements, of course, is the fact that most PPPs imply massive investments. So already there you have a leverage to create something green and sustainable. And also because of the size of many PPP projects, with PPP and PPP procurement, you can change businesses, you can transform even governments. When I was heading the PPP center in Belgium for many years, I saw the market changing. In the beginning of PPPs 20 years ago, we really saw that our construction companies were doing business in a very traditional way. They were looking at the PPP projects and maybe doing the things they normally do with traditional contracting and traditional construction. But after a while, you saw that those businesses were transforming themselves, and also the government was transforming itself. And this is, of course, because of the size of the investments, because of the importance of those projects. And this transformation, of course, is very interesting, because you could also use this, and if you combine it with sustainability and green procurement, you could use the purchasing power and the big projects to transform businesses and to transform the way the government works. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a very challenging one, and we need to act. in each of the phases of the PPP projects to come to results. We need to transform policy, we need to align with other actors, and we need to interact really in the procurement phase. And this is also the challenge and also the theme for this this panel. So we have identified 3 questions. What are the green procurement practices that can be promoted and implemented along the 3 PPP procurement stages? That's the first question for the panel. How are these practices impacting, if any, the whole life cycle costs? What about the bankability? That's the second question. And then a third question, what are the recommended public policy actions for governments to ensure that PPP procurement becomes more sustainable and circular? And I'm really happy. And it's an honor and a privilege to have 6 experts today in the panel, 3 people online and 3 people in person, and I want to introduce them. We have Caterini, who has joined us online. She is a director at the coordination directorate in Greece of the Hellenic Single Public Procurement Authority, and her directorate is involved in the development and the promotion of national public procurement strategy, policy, and action. So I'm really very happy that she's in the panel. And I think her organization has an important role to play also in Greece, and especially the directorate where she is the director. Then we have Juliana. She's a top expert in PPPs and concessions. She's a lawyer for many years, working in one of the most important and largest law firms of Romania, in Tuca. Her practice is focused on PPPs, concessions, and also regulatory and legal services. I'm very happy she's here, and I know she's also working on some academic things. So it's very nice that you could come from Romania. Then we have Natasha Schmidt. She's a legal advisor working for the, and I will say it in English, not in Portuguese, for the Investment Partnership Program. It's a secretariat under the Ministry of Economy in Brazil. So she came all the way from Brazil to be here. She's also a member of Infra Women Brazil, a social organization that supports the presence of women in infrastructure. It's very nice. And Berkeley Global Society, but I suppose that has to do with the fact that you studied in Berkeley. Yes. Okay. She was also a lawyer and an in-house counsel, so she has also a lot of experience. Then we have Désirée. Désirée, I think she joined in online. She's a colleague of me in the editorial board of the European Public Procurement and Public-Private Partnerships Law Review, which is the leading law review in the EU on PPPs. She's doing a PhD, and she's also lecturing. I know she wanted to come, but because of some circumstances, it didn't happen. But I'm very happy that she could join in online from Yale. We have Christopher. I don't think I have to introduce Christopher. He's attending online. He's of course well known for his expertise in PPPs and legal advice. He was involved for many years in the bureau of the UNECE Working Party and the team of specialists on public-private partnerships. And he has been a lawyer for decades in the city in London, in top-notch law firms, and he was also a investment banker in the past. So I'm really very happy that he was able to join. Then who did I forget? Scott, yeah, Scott, my friend. Scott, yeah, Scott, of course.
Hi, Christopher.
Scott, yeah, I think we met when you were still lecturing at the university. Yeah, quite. Maybe. Yeah, we did a long time ago. You're an attorney and an advisor, director of the Global Middle Office at ADEC. Is it ADEC or ADEC? ADEC. ADEC, okay. And of course, you're also providing consultancy and help to the UNECE Economic Commission. So the UNECE for in the Working Party on Public-Private Partnerships. We work together. You're a fantastic person. I really like your sense of quality. Okay, and then this was yeah, that was to illustrate. It was to illustrate the emotion. Yeah, we can kiss afterwards. You can kiss afterwards. Yeah.
Please sit right here.
No. Before I pass the floor to the panelists, I want to thank the business school for hosting this fantastic event and these very nice rooms. I also want to thank the secretariat, Tony, Antonin, Claudio, for the fantastic job they did, the preparation, the support, because guys, you really did a lot of work, and it's really fantastic also what you're doing. Yeah. And then just to the people of the secretariat, the topic of today. It's really an important topic. It's a gap. You should really focus on it. You should put it on and keep it on the agenda because we really need the best practices in relation to sustainability and in relation to the green procurement. So it's an important one. Okay, let me now switch to the questions, and I would love to go to the first question. So what are the green procurement practices that can be promoted and implemented along the 3 PPP procurement stages? And I want to give the floor to Désirée. Désirée, I don't know if you hear me.
Hello, Steve, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Désirée, do you have something you could share with us on this topic, and also after you, I would love an answer from Scott on this same question. Désirée, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I am honored to talk today. It is the first time that I'm presenting at the UN, so I'm really excited to be here. And I'm also counting a little bit on Scott to fill the gaps in case, or for sure, which there will be, because I can by far not cover anything in 8 minutes. But I will try to be as concise as possible. And I would like to make 2 introductory notes about just answering this question. First of all, I'm coming from a public procurement background. I've done work on sustainability. And I feel this gives me the chance to look at it from a different perspective, to give a comparative view. This is like a brief introduction. I think there are large benefits to PPPs, especially because they cover the 3rd stage, the implementation stage, and the contracting and monitoring and enforcement. So I feel this is the large perspective. But what was also mentioned by Steve is that the UN, or let's say the sustainability developments, have started a lot earlier in public procurement, or a little bit earlier in public procurement than in PPP. So we are right now to integrate those things also into public-private partnerships. The second remark is that I do research in law and economics. This is basically making use of economic theories, empirical and theoretical, to understand and answer legal questions. And this is also what will frame my today's answer. I will briefly mention some behavioral economics and how we can promote green sustainable procurement in the PPPs using or making use of those instruments. And having said this, I would like to jump into the different examples that I see how we can promote green procurement in PPPs, starting with the first phase, the planning phase. So I believe that we are confronted with information asymmetries, which is an economic term. But what it means is that contractors have often a lot more information and knowledge about their own products. That is natural. So the government needs to kind of ramp up their information and understand more. I believe what we can do is that we can have sustainability experts on the government side to better understand and to alleviate this information and this imbalance between contractors and the government. So to create kind of a level playing field, I believe this is very important. because we first need to understand what do we want. In order to understand what we want, we need to have acquired a certain knowledge. And I feel there is often a lack, at least of what I have seen on the government side. And then we also should understand what exists out there. And I think this is a second point that I see as very important. Conducting a green market analysis, like what is out there. I believe that the government, on the government side, is often a lack of having a holistic view or even a view on the specific partnership. What kind of sustainable technologies, sustainable approaches, being in building roads, in IT services, etc., exist. So having like investing more into kind of understanding and researching what kind of possibilities even exist out there. Having said that, I think I have one more point in the planning phase, which I believe is a little bit radical, but oftentimes we have this like sensibility assessment right before we tender and procure. And having an environmental impact assessment, things that have been done, for example, in the United States, I see as important. But the question for me is who carries the burden of conducting those assessments? It's very expensive, it's burdensome. So far, it has mostly relied that burden on the government side. So a very, very radical idea, I'm not sure if this is even implementable, and the practitioners will correct me if I'm wrong, is how if we share that responsibility, or how if we kind of also take the contractor into responsibility to at least give an understanding of what the environmental impact of the products the company is offering, or the services the company is offering can be. So this is these are the things that I see in the planning phase. And then I would like to come to the procurement phase, that kind of the core phase, at least from a public procurement perspective, but probably not from a PPP perspective. What is important, I would like to introduce here, is the concept of using green defaults. So in behavioral economics, which relies very strongly on like what are human beings' behaviors and how they can be influenced without coercion, without regulation, but with, and also not by financial incentives. It's kind of in between those extremes. It's a nudge theory, and like I don't know if you heard of those, but Nobel Prize winner Thaler and Sunstein in the United States have made a lot of progress in this area. So the default effect basically relies on the human laziness or inertia, how they call it, like scientifically, of reacting to a certain suggestion that has been made. The default, for example, could be, we want sustainable partnership, and if you opt out, or if you don't, you have to opt out as a consortium, as a partnership. And then the question is, how strictly is this default enforced? Can the companies opt out in writing? Is it on the file, or is it even public? And this is has a little bit of a naming and shaming element to it, I believe. And I think that having those green defaults, in fact, are very powerful, because studies have shown that if a default is in place, it shifts the proportion. So before, if, for example, using renewable energy is not the default, but using oil, gas, or whatever is the default, 80% of people use that. However, if there is a default that renewable energy is as a default kind of prescribed, most customers, they stick with that default. So they wouldn't opt out of the mix of different, for example, for households, of the different sources they can kind of use to warm, heat, whatever their households. And then it shifts from 80% using renewable energy versus 20% before. So this is a very powerful impact, and implementing that in PPPs, I see as at least an interesting prototype that we can entertain to make a difference. Then one other thing I believe is important, greenwashing. I believe we have heard that term many times. It's a kind of having a moral commitment from the company side that is exaggerated or insincere, in the sense that what does it even mean to be green? Does it mean I invest in EFTs, in funds, or does it mean that I actually watch my CO2 emissions, and to what extent? To avoid greenwashing, also in the PPP context, I believe an industry standard in terms of reporting and accounting is very important and is key. We have seen several private initiatives over the years in that realm, and like, for example, the greenhouse gas protocol, that some of you might be familiar, but there are also like more financial aspects to it, like, for example, the MSCI ESG scores. It's like a Morgan Stanley company that rates firms and gives them scores, similar to Standard & Poor's with the financial companies. And we know that there are difficulties associated with rating companies, as we've experienced in 2008. However, creating kind of a platform to do a similar sustainability rating for those companies, I think helps with kind of avoiding the big part of greenwashing. And of course, the more standards we have and the more kind of reliable they become, the better the situation gets. And just here to mention, last year, there has been founded the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is basically the pendant to the financial industry, the Financial Standards Board, who conduct accounting and reporting or design accounting and reporting standards. And the same we can do, they're doing for sustainability and green procurement. And I think this will contribute a lot also to PPPs. One more thing that also comes from the area of behavioral economics, and I really do like, is I call it the comply or explain approach. It has been used in Denmark for public procurement for the integration of social clauses into contracts. So in order to have traineeships, for example, that are integrated more into contracts, they would say you have to integrate such a contract clause into the contract. And if you do not, you have to explain it why not, and you have to explain it publicly. And I think, again, this kind of soft measures of like outing and admitting or publicly stating that you're not being sustainable, that you're not including those contractual terms and these emission targets into the contract can have a strong effect. I'm aware of the time, so I will make 2 points on the implementation phase. In the implementation phase, I think this is where the big difference happens between public procurement and PPP. PPP is long-term. It is about risk sharing. And I think this enables and offers a great benefit to including sustainability into PPPs. Most importantly, the issue of like life cycle costs from cradle to grave, so to say, respecting and integrating, calculating those costs from the production, from the material to a recycling. And I think this is one of the biggest benefits that we can do in PPP. What this requires, however, is a very good contract monitoring and management. And I don't only mean in terms of times and costs, but also in terms of sustainability. So having defined targets, emission targets, how much can be used. And for example, here, the greenhouse gas protocol offers very good calculation methods that can be done, not like measuring the air, but also based on fuel use and electricity use. Tracking those over time and monitoring those is very important. And then attached to that, having kind of a bonus malus system or carrots and sticks, pay for performance. If this performance is not met, then you as a partnership receive less. There might also be liquidated damages in place. But if you overperform, you get a bonus. And I think the key here is we know that PPPs sometimes suffer from going over cost and going over time. And I think the important thing here is that the enforcement and the penalties get more rigorous. This is one point. And the other point is that the monitoring should also happen not only for time and money, but also for sustainability targets. this will conclude at least my very brief flying through all the stages. I am aware that I couldn't dive into all of these aspects deeply, but I hope that I could share some of my thoughts, and I'm of course very happy if Scott can fill the gaps here to what I've said.
Yeah, Scott, please do. We have heard a lot of things, but I'm convinced that you have some ideas, maybe some things that you disagree as a practitioner. I don't know.
I just want to make sure is my microphone on? Everyone can hear me okay. All right, well, thank you. It's interesting. I'm a very practical person, and I've actually been through a number of projects. And I think the theory is great, but in reality, it's a very practical exercise. And I kind of break it down into two components. It's people and it's data. And I think that, you know, in the US context, or let's say Western Europe, or, you know, sophisticated economies, it's great to talk about, you know, applying green, sustainable, you know, practices to a project. But most of the world is not in that stage, right? We're in middle, low income countries that don't have a lot of capacity in the first place. In many instances, don't, you know, have struggle even doing a PPP functionally through the process. And so the idea of green procurement and sustainability is an additional layer of complexity that really, it's a filter that I don't think most countries are going to be able to perform using public service capacity and the staff that they currently have. The complexity of the data that needs to be benchmarked prior to procuring a project so that you can actually prove that it's improving or mitigating environmental impacts. The customization of the tender documents, the specificity in which you have to lay out performance metrics on how that project or contract is to perform are very technical and very difficult to do. And even as a lawyer, I would not feel comfortable doing it. And I've only seen it a handful of times laid onto some of the more complex projects that I've seen. And in countries, quite frankly, that had a depth of project preparation capacity and resources that they could bring on specialized expertise who could do this for them and support their PPP unit or their tendering team to do the technical level of review and analysis that's necessary. So I think there's two things there that I would just sort of make observations on, is the people, right? We already have made suggestions, and I think it's, you know, we're coming back to the same things in the PPP world, which is you need good enabling legislation, you need a PPP unit, you know, all those basic premises of how PPPs are to be enabled. Well, one of them also is your PPP unit is going to have to develop expertise in environmental and social governance aspects. That is a tall order, as I've already suggested. You're also going to need a policy initiative, some sort of, you know, leadership support for this to be a layer or add-on to an already challenged project that has a lot of competing interests, ministries that don't agree, PPP units that don't agree with the ministries. There's just a lot of complexity already with the PPP. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think we're kind of at an early stage of sustainable PPP procurement. And I'm quite happy to see UNECE is starting to think about normalizing the field, providing some tools for governments to look at and use as resources, simplify the process to some degree, or at least where it's possible to simplify the process and give them some tools to go forward with. You know, I think with Mr. Cazolet sitting there, we did a comprehensive review of PPP legislation throughout the globe. 80 some countries we've reviewed. And I don't remember any having green components in the law. So there may be some now, that was a number of years ago, but I think we're still in this fledgling stage and there's a lot of opportunity here, but there's a lot of complexity too. Some of my other initial observations, I don't know how much time I technically have.
No, it's fine. It's
okay,
fine.
all right.
As long as it's interesting. Yeah.
As long as it's interesting. Okay, I'll keep trying. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of design choices associated with the project and the facility, infrastructure, service, whatever it is you're providing. And those are value choices that happen in great depth and detail. You know, if I said, what is a green train line? The thousands of components and choices that you can make with respect to a train line, it's overwhelming, right? Even a technical expert may not be able to tell you all the different ways that a train line may be engineered, designed, what the train cars could be, you know, the longevity of life of those cars, the efficiency with which they run, the way that the computer systems that have to be on there to monitor their performance, all highly, highly, highly technical. And then you're going to, and what Désirée rightly mentioned was, you're going to run into proprietary approaches. So you're going to have train line systems and technology that only one provider is able to provide. So you have this procuring challenge where you've got alternative technical concepts that are owned by specific bidders, and they need to be addressed within the tendering documents and the process with which, you know, you're having that dialogue with those potential providers. I think I'm just poking
No,
holes
but,
in the process.
that's what you also see in regular public procurement. Those same questions. But I think there you have the advantage of PPPs, because in PPPs you are working with functional specifications. So basically you can have different solutions and not necessarily one solution. And I think the green project, I think government should stick to defining the goals, and then the private partner should come with the green solutions. So I think PPP could be an answer to avoid some of the challenges we face in traditional public contracting.
I was just going to add that I think the irony is PPP may be the best solution for achieving some of the green sustainable goals, because in traditional public procurement, it's low bid, it's, you know, very strict specifications, and you have to meet that or, you know, you don't qualify. So PPP has that flexibility. I'm not going to encourage every jurisdiction to have competitive dialogue with its bidders. There's a lot of pitfalls and corruption issues with that. But in a very technically complicated project, you may have to entertain those ideas in order to appropriately value the different choices and options that are out there.
This brings me in fact to the second question, and the second question is focused on the bankability, because if you come with innovative solutions, of course, then can we attract private finance? Will the private parties be able to finance the solutions? And Scott, what do you think? Could that be an issue? And maybe also I will ask the same question to Christopher. Is that an issue or a threat, or what do you think?
Well, I think that's also, and I'll allow Christopher to add detail to my response. I think that the financing component, you know, ultimately on most large projects, you are asking the bidders to come forward with a financial package. And so it's, you know, and it varies by industry. Certain financial institutions support certain large entities that come in and do train lines versus airports versus port facilities versus wastewater treatment. And these large providers go to the same lenders. They've got existing relationships. And that's kind of what you're competing, right? Is that depth, that ability for them to show up and provide this financing. And you're comparing those financing packages just as you would the technical solutions. So I think there's an opportunity there. I also think it's in its infancy. You know, I know in the EU taxonomy, there are very recent guidelines on you know, financial instruments that are purporting to be environmentally sensitive or support environmental projects, but it applies very strictly just to the financing package and the tools. So that's what you're asking your provider to show up with, right? So I don't see a huge difference in the needs-based assessment of a government saying, we want it to be this green and to this level and to this specification. And you're just, of course, hoping that those you know, types of bidders and those financial packages arrive. But to a large extent, it's going to be a new set of conditions associated with one tranche of that debt package. So, you know, I'm not aware of a lot of other jurisdictions that have regulated the financial instruments in the way that the EU has. I think it's kind of a front runner in that way. Of course, there are, for general corporate activity, there's like ESG standards and the corporate sort of measurements that are out there. But with respect to PPP, I still think it's something that the government can make a choice as to the degree at which it wants to layer on green elements and entice and induce its bidders to show up with that type of package.
Okay, Christopher, do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, and it's also a pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to participate in this session. I've spoken several times at these fora before. I just wish I were there in person, even though you seem to have British or Belgian weather where you're all sitting, which is a bit of a surprise. But unfortunately, pressure of work in London made it impossible for me to get out there. But just coming back to the point Scott was discussing, I would answer it in these terms. I don't see an inherent problem of bankability in applying GPP, Green Public Procurement, policies and standards to PPP projects. Actually, quite the opposite. I think most financial institutions, commercial banks, certainly development banks, IFIs would welcome it, because so many of them at the moment are trying to find ways of giving better effect to ESG values in the projects they finance and the way they go about financing them. So I don't think there are particular financial challenges in applying GPP standards more effectively to projects. It's all a question of how you do it, how much precision you insist on when you're doing it, how binding the regulations are, and so on. These are things I wanted to talk about in a few minutes when we come onto the government policy discussion. But when you're putting together PPPs, generally, you have to be fully aware of their bankability. Practitioners, the market, government procurement teams usually have a pretty strong sense these days of what makes a project bankable or unbankable. It's not that difficult to get it right. There's no particular magic to the phrase. In essence, it simply means what does a project have to look like in order for a bank or a group of banks to be prepared to finance it. And there's a great deal of understanding of how that's achieved, above all in terms of the contractual provisions and the financing and security documents. And I really don't see the subject of green procurement as making that significantly more difficult and more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Well, let me just give one remark, and that's my own experience. What I did see in projects where the solutions were very innovative, I saw in some cases that the financial institutions, they were reluctant. They were reluctant because they were not sure if the technology would be, what would happen on the long term. And this of course has an impact on the business case. So I do think we should be very careful. But it's true. It's nowadays it's more or less standardized. So in most cases, we can get away with it.
Steven, may I quickly respond to that? Just
yes, of course,
say
Christopher.
Thank you. And sorry to interrupt. It's always been the case that projects that are too innovative or too much at the cutting edge of technological change may cause problems for bankers, because bankers prefer to deal with what is familiar and recognized and has been tested by the market. So that, I think that's always been a basic element of a project's bankability. Is it using tried and tested technology? If it's not, then yes, you have more of a problem with financeability. Thank you.
Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, I think Christopher hit it on the head. Banks are worried about default. They want to get paid. That's what they're worried about. And so they assess every project document and contract to find out what are the risks of default, where are the triggers, what's going to happen where I may not be able to recover my investment. Of course, they're looking at political risk for the jurisdiction. They're looking at the type of project. They're looking at revenues. They're looking at all the underpinnings of the transaction. And I think that green elements as a layer, as a requirement, could become a concern if it's a default mechanism. And I think that There are tools that you can put into the contract where it's a soft default and it doesn't trigger a termination of the transaction. And there's greater remedies and recourse for recovering from a default on green aspects. You know, there are tools that you can put into the contract that would sort of mitigate that risk and probably make it a slightly more bankable project. But there are solutions and approaches, you know, to get around those things.
Yeah, I agree. Risk is key, and one of the risk, of course, is also the government. And this brings us to policy which should be very stable. And this is something I think we see in energy projects where some things are happening at the moment, and where we have huge instability because of the new requirements in relation to, for example, carbon neutrality. But this brings me to my third question. What are the recommended public policy actions for governments to ensure that PPP procurement becomes more sustainable and circular? And let me start with Ekaterina to see what you can add to the debate and what your experiences are in this relation.
Yes, thank you. Good evening to everyone. I think that at the planning stage of PPPs, as governments and contracting authorities are those that must adequately define the most appropriate output specification of a PPP contract. This must be concluded in line with certain policies and priorities that reflect sustainable development strategies, green and circular economy roadmaps, or green recovery policy. In this concept, Greece has adopted public procurement national strategy and a relevant action plan. 4 pillars have been developed for different policy priorities in the domain of public procurement. The third one, Pillar C, is dealing with broader strategic goals and policy implementation through public procurement. The Pillar C has been further analyzed in 7 strategic directions, while one of them, C1, deals with sustainable, circular, and green public procurement, and another one, C5, deals with public-private partnerships. The strategic direction, C1, outlines a variety of actions and support measures for green and sustainable traditional public procurement and promotes the implementation of our green NAP. Accordingly, the strategic direction C5 outlines the promotion of principles and guidance on PPPs, the development of legal framework for unsolicited proposals, and the development of a PPP standard tender document for construction and upgrading of ports. The last action of this strategic direction refers to a sustainable flag PP project for the creation of innovation district in Attica, according to standards successfully adopted in international business centers. The innovation district would act as main pillar for the development of the area's ecosystem through a dynamic and innovative combination of policies, quality, space, and properly designed facilities, programs, and high value-added services. The Ministry of the Development and Investment, which has launched the PP, shall ensure the achievement of the objectives by monitoring the performance of the private partner via contractual mechanism and would include relevant performance indicator. The innovation district shall be built within an abandoned former industrial complex that was producing pollutant industrial products and includes buildings that date back to the first industrial period. Therefore, the project would also act as a regeneration project for the surrounding area. The private partner would be obliged to design the project on the basis of sustainability principles and to receive an international certification for green buildings. I would also like to add that in my point of view, and accordingly to how we manage traditional public procurement, many PP projects in Greece fulfill green and environmental and sustainable issues, as their scope and subject matter is totally green and sustainable. Such PPPs are waste management projects. I can tell two best practices of such PP projects: the Epirus Waste Management PPP, which include a unit of mechanical biological treatment of mixed waste with recycling capabilities and production of compost type material and green energy from the exploitation of biogas, and the Ceres Waste Management PPP, which also includes a unit of mechanical biological treatment of mixed waste with recycling capabilities and production of compost material. That's my points about the strategy, and I would like to add some other point about the nature of PPPs and the main characteristic of the life cycle approach. I think that the integration of the various elements of the project into one single project assist in selecting the most efficient, sustainable, and cost-effective solution for long term, rather than the cheapest solution in short term that may impose problems in many different ways later on. Additional, when examining the maturity of a PP proposal, the necessary preliminary designs and study must focus on important parameters related to environment, social and physical risks, so that particular risks as well as opportunities to tackle social and environmental issues can be specifically identified and taken into account in tender requirements, output specification, and PP contract when the project is designed and tendered. The outcomes of environmental and social impact assessment are also crucial to ensure that any identified risk and their mitigation are adequately captured in the PPP contract. On the other hand, risk allocation has a direct impact on bankability and pricing, which determine whether a PP project will be affordable and financeable.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your insights. So it's clear there are projects already with a lot of green elements, and of course that does not come as a surprise. Juliana, you have a lot of experience with PPP projects in Romania. What do you think about my question?
Well, I'm very glad that PPP procurement is of great interest lately. It should be like this because in these times, difficult times, we need private financing of provided by the private partners. As you already said, and very well said, that it should not be a missed opportunity. And I will challenge Scott also. I would try to grant the idea that the PPP procurement is ideal for using the green criteria. Indeed, we know, all of us, we are aware that PPP contracts are difficult to be structured, including from a legal point of view, from a technical point of view, and economical point of view. Indeed, the green criteria should be used very often, or as often as possible, in the PPP contracts and into the PPP project. And I would move forward, and I would say that we should go back to the private sector expertise, because they have a huge expertise in every field, including in the economic field, including in the green criteria, and to achieve the sustainable development goals together with the private partner. So Indeed, this should be a preferable approach, including to carry out a prior market consultation before launching an award procedure for a PPP procurement contract. Because if a public partner carries out prior market consultation, that public partner can acquire a lot of information regarding the works, regarding the services to be provided in a very professional manner, because private partners are very involved and have developed managing programs, environmental programs, and public partners should benefit from their expertise prior to launching an award procedure for awarding a PPP procurement contract. And I get back to what Scott said very well, that indeed public partners, and from my experience, public partners unfortunately do not have enough public funds to purchase technical assistance. This is a real problem, because they do not have a technical assistance. And this is why public partners have to be supported and have to be in any way helped, because it is even better to work together rather than to have a project that will fail because the potential private partners and the public partners did not discuss enough, did not, I wouldn't say negotiate, did not exchange information from one to another. So this would be one of my suggestions, to use a prior market consultation before launching an award procedure. And also, I would encourage public partners to use green criteria, because as Christopher said earlier, this does not affect the bankability of the project, because the bank will finance the project, because this is a trend. And this is a trend very recently, given the support provided by the multilateral banks, by the international organization, also the citizens and the public entities become more aware about the importance of protecting the environment and to use green criteria in the award procedure. So this would be one approach. Another approach that I would suggest, it would be, as also said Scott very well, to use guidelines. But guidelines, I would suggest to be used very concrete, very specifically, not generally saying that we are aware that if you use a certain selection criteria, green selection criteria, or an award criteria based on the life award criteria, it would benefit for sure. But contracting authorities, and namely public partners in the case of PPP procurement, should have the visibility of the whole process, from carrying out an award procedure based on green criteria until the last moment post implementation of the contract. And as you've read in a book on this topic, Steven even wrote a book on this topic, and I recommend it to you. This would be preferable, to have visibility for the contracting authorities on the whole process, because they will trust this approach, and they will use green criteria more confident and more convinced that this is a correct approach on on a long term, because PPP contracts, as Scott also said, and Désirée earlier, are long-term contracts, and we are now aware of that. Also, Désirée pointed out a very interesting approach. I sustain it totally, and I knew it, and I wanted also to tell it, and I will once again tell it, because it is very good to be disseminated. It is preferable to change the approach, to shift the paradigm into the fact similar with the obligation to divide the contract. So the contracting authorities are free to decide if divide a contract or not into lots. But in the case they do not divide it, they have the obligation to motivate it, to give the ground for that decision. So this should be approached. My impression is also in this field, saying that if contracting authorities or public partners do not use green criteria, they should publicly explain why they consider that green criteria are not appropriate for that contract. So this, by obliging contracting authorities to explain why they consider that they could not apply green criteria, it could raise the awareness on that field. And also, I would suggest, and I was discussing with Steven earlier, that also the authorities having duties in the field of regulatory in public procurement and in PPP, of course, PPP units, when exercising the ex-ante control, they should analyze the tender documentation, and of course, Scott will agree with me that and decide not to publish an award procedure if they do not use green criteria even. I don't know if you will agree with me. I hope you will, but maybe you will consider this suggestion for the future. Because if we do not start from one moment in time to, let's say, not to force contracting authorities, but to give them an incentive to proceed and to use and to believe, in the end, to believe in the green criteria, probably they will be lazy, as someone probably you said earlier also, Scott, that they will prefer not to apply green criteria. And we will end just to discuss, just to say that there are some green criteria, but they are not used. And if they are not used, they will not leave, and it will be very, very sad and not desirable. So this would be my suggestions to work on guidelines, and I think also the UNECE also has this approach, and by granting example, I know that European Commission also drafted a handbook on green procurement, which is actually a very good document, but should be also my suggestion would be to be more concrete, more applicated, more explicitly provided the case studies there, because the public partner will foresee the whole process.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that are some very interesting ideas. I do like I especially like the idea that making the GPP at the moment, most of them are voluntary, but making them mandatory based on the idea of comply or explain. We see that we see that indeed in other cases and in other branches, and it seems to work. Also very important is expertise and capacity building, and then we need good projects. We need champion projects. Champion projects, of course, requires that you have a good and strong authority, and that the government invests in it. This brings me to Natasha. Natasha, maybe can you share some experience from Brazil?
Yes, and during our conversation, I was listening to you, Scott, and you said some words that made me thought. You're saying that we need to think about how to make a railway more green. And in Brazil, we're one step back because in a meaning that having a railway is something that is greener than having a road.
That's also the nature. Huh?
That was not me, okay.
This is a green meeting.
It's a green meeting.
That's the UNECE Howard writing.
So we are one step back, and I would like to ask you, Steve, to explain a little bit about how the Brazilian investment partnership program works, because it will answer many of the questions that were posed. So first of all, of course, I would like to thank you for the invitation of being here, and letting you know that everybody knows that Brazil is a continental country, right? It's a giant country. We are the 5th country in the world in terms of size of area, and we are the 6th country in the world in terms of population. So we are aware of the importance of developing a short, medium, and long-term or social and infrastructure projects through PPPs. In a sustainable and responsible way. We have careful eyes to our green assets, since we have the greatest biodiversity in the world, and Brazil will have it. 60% of the national territory is natural vegetation. Was not touched. And also we have the largest water reserve in the world, with 12% of the world reserve of water. So of course it brings us to the necessity of being responsible with the environment. And the thing is that how can we do that? How can we be responsible knowing that we are a country that lacks infrastructure? We still lack a lot of infrastructure. And also that we are a country that we have low income rates. So our population, they need infrastructure, but also the first thought of the population is to survive, is to trying to think about health and employment, and also, food. So this is the first thing that the population thinks. So how can we make them think that nature, that environment is also something to be prioritized? And this is a challenge to make this mindset in the population. And we believe that through PPPs, it is possible to change it, or to focus on it. So first, I would like to explain a little bit about the governance of our program, of the PPI program. And how in this governance, we have a focus on green aspects of the projects that are qualified under our program. So the projects that are qualified under the PPI portfolio, they gain a prioritization before other projects that are not qualified under the PPI portfolio. The qualification happens in a meeting. This meeting is regularly held with the participation of 6 ministries of the Brazilian federal government, in addition to the president of Brazil, and also the presidents of the public banks. So it's a council, it's the PPI council, and the PPI council, they decide about the qualification of the infrastructure and social projects that will be that will receive this kind of prioritization for the federal government. So among these 6 ministries, we have the Ministry of Environment making the decision about the projects that are under the PPI and portfolio. So it shows from the beginning, from the moment that the project will come to the portfolio, the concern of the federal government in the environment, because our ministry, Ministry of Environment, it participates of this council of the projects of the PPI Council. So, well, as I said, Brazil is a country needing infrastructure, and we need to do it in a sustainable way, because we know that the greater our attention is to the green project, to the green aspects of the projects, the greater will be the interest of the investors in these projects. And we have a legal framework in Brazil. It is important to mention too, we have a legal framework in Brazil that is geared by environmental protection. So for instance, our constitution, it is from '88, it has a specific chapter about environmental protection. So the constitution has that, and there is a very large framework in Brazil also that protects the environment. So we are very committed to that. Another thing that I would like to point is that it is important to speak about this legal framework in Brazil, because the contracts that are drafted, that are stated in PPI, they don't only have to contain clauses in order to the private sector to respect the environment and to promote sustainability, but also this obligation, it comes from the legislation. It comes from the constitution. It's not only something that we have to write down in the contracts. It means that the contracts, they must obey the law. Not only, we don't have a lot of space, let's say, on the contracts to be creative against the law. We don't do that, of course not. The law is that informs the contracts in Brazil. Knowing that, I would like to point 3 projects where we could handle some green practices. In PPI, we have lots of projects, railway projects, road projects, everything that matters regarding infrastructure that is important for the country, probably will be under the PPI portfolio. But I would like to also to let you know that not only in the federal context, the projects are not only under the federal context, but also municipalities and states. And it is important to say, because the social projects, many of the social projects are under the municipalities and the states. And I am pointing 3 projects where we could make them more sustainable. So the practice that we adopted. So the first one is our sanitation projects in Brazil. We have in PPI 17 projects right now. And in Brazil is a country where sanitation is mainly provided by the state nowadays. So it's not through PPPs, it's by the state. And only a recent legal framework in sanitation is providing conditions to allow more investments, private investments in this area. So it's a law from 2020, and it's innovated in this area. So these investments are very necessary, since only 51% of the Brazilian people, have access to sewage collection, and less than 45% of the country has sewage treatment. So this new law imposed a time goal for the universalization of water and sewage. So see, we don't have universalization of water treatment or sewage in Brazil. Now, with this new framework, with the new sanitation framework, we are achieving it through the PPPs that we are developing in PPI. So this universalization will have to happen until 2033. So we have 10 years to provide via PPPs the universalization of the services. And of course, this is naturally a sustainable project, because we are talking about sanitation, we're talking about water and rivers, and it's very natural to be a green project. All of these projects are green projects. The second project that I would like to highlight is regarding public lighting. So the parks of the city, the public lights in the cities, they are also part of PPP projects under PPI. And how contractually we manage to foment the PPP to be greener and greener a long time. So these contracts, they are drafted to last between 13 and 23 years. So they are long-term contracts, and the private sector has to administrate the public lighting part of the city, of the streets and the roads, the poles and the lights, and also change the old lights. This is also the obligation. They have to change the old lights that are not environmentally adequate to LED lights. So it generates more energy efficiency and therefore more sustainable way to provide these services. The contractual clause based on studies that were developed during the planning stage of these projects, of this public lighting project, is that the investor, the PPP concessionaire, will profit more and more if it increases the energy efficiency, and therefore making the project more sustainable in a long-term basis, since the concessionaire have a contractual stimulation to find new technologies. So it means that the more the private sector, the concessionary performs in a way of giving more efficiency and energy efficiency, it will profit more. So it has a natural stimulation to find ways to make it greener, to make it more sustainable regarding this energy efficiency. And the third and the last project that I would like to mention here is the solid waste management that we are now studying in PPI. We had an auction a few weeks ago, the auction of Convale. It's a consortium of 8 municipalities. It's in Minas Gerais. It's a state of Brazil. And as a consortium, the consortium is contracting the private sector via PPPs for a long-term contract, 30 years, for collecting, treating, and making the right disposal of, from an environmental perspective, of trash, of garbage. So in the last PPP contract of solid waste management, 1.5 billion reais investments were required by the private sector. But what I would like to point is one obligation, one contractual obligation that the new concessionaire will have to reduce the actual situation of 80% of disposal in landfills to only 50% of this disposal, of this way of disposal of the landfills. But the contract doesn't say how the private sector will do that. And that is obvious why. The private sector will have to find in its own ways, with its creativity, to achieve this contractual obligation. And probably what will happen is that the population, the private sector will try to convince the population for recycling, for doing the environmental education in order to achieve this contractual marks for us. So this cultural modification of the population is something that we expect from the PPPs. Yeah, as a contractual obligation, it is an indirect impact on the population, making these making a greener environment. So these are the things that I would like to point, Steve, and
yes,
to answer whatever.
No,
like.
thank you very much. This was in fact what I requested. So thank you for sharing your experiences. And I also like the idea of well, also in some other countries, sustainability is in the constitution. And also, as Juliana said, I think the legislator has an important role to play. So I agree. Christopher, are you still there? Because you
still
can
here,
also
very
share
much
your ideas. Yeah,
Of
yeah, we
course,
don't see you,
it'll
but
be a pleasure, Stephen. You can see me.
please,
All right.
please.
No,
Yes, yes.
I'm
Now we
still
see
very
you. Please
much
share
there.
some of your ideas.
All right, thank you very much. I'd just simply like to say that I have prepared a formal presentation because I saw this very much as a discussion, a debate between our very high-powered panelists. So I've simply noted down a few ideas that I want to run through rapidly, 5 points that I'd like to try and make as quickly as I can, not just because time is running short, but because, as Scott Walchak pointed out, my friend Bruno de Cazalet is sitting in the audience, even though I can't see him. And Bruno often tells me
we see him, so he's there.
Bruno, oh, hi, good afternoon, Bruno. Bruno often tells me that I go on for too long, so I'll try and keep it short. But
I will stop you.
All right,
no.
thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, Stephen. And the 5 key points are these, I think. First of all, government has a vital role to play now in addressing this subject. I think it's worth stressing that we don't have any time to waste. It's absolutely critical to disseminate GPP ideas and green criteria as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible as we can around the world. The course of this discussion has showed us how many options there are out there. I mean, there are so many different ways in which this subject can be approached. Désirée gave us some examples of some very sophisticated approaches that can be taken at different levels of procurement. But we've also heard Scott's ideas, Scott's concerns about the sophistication of being too ambitious at a green level, and other indications from other speakers about how PPPs are actually ready-made, in a sense, for the use of GPP. I think we need to keep that in mind. But because of the range of choice that we have, because of the number of options we have, it's vital for government to take the lead. Stephen, in his opening remarks, made the point that public procurement represents a huge proportion of government spending around the world. It does. In Britain, it represents about 30% of government spending. I'm sure similar figures, maybe even higher figures, can be found elsewhere. And that means that governments have enormous potential purchasing power here, which they can use to shape the market in favorable ways that really will give effect to these green ideas. And so I think it's vital that it does so. And secondly, the second point is that government needs to do this by helping us to define GPP criteria as effectively as possible. GPP is a good idea, but to so many people, it means different things. And I think many participants in the market flounder as they try to embrace it. Government bodies wonder how to give best effect to it in their procurement documents. The private sector wonders how to give best effect to it in its innovative ideas and so on. And so precision is needed and coherence is needed. And the more rigorously each country can define its GPP criteria, the better. These GPP criteria need to be robust, they need to be ambitious, but they also need to be realistic and feasible, and they need to be verifiable. And so people need to know what that means in practice, and governments need to set it out. The EU has done an amazing job in this area over the past 10 years. I think that the speaker from Romania, Izid Ilona, referred to the Green Procurement Handbook that the EU has prepared. But a lot of this material is now available online. I've been looking at it very carefully, and it represents a huge corpus of extremely valuable guidance on the subject, most of which is not legally binding. The EU emphasizes that it's voluntary. It's up to each country to make use of these ideas as effectively as possible. But when you look at the 20 or so criteria that the EU has written about, you've got 40 or 50 pages of guidance material about each one. And I think that it's now vital, if we're going to promote green procurement around the world, it's now vital for countries all over the world to do a similar exercise and to set out what they mean by GPP criteria and processes, and do it as effectively as possible in ways that suit them. That means that they won't necessarily be caught out by the overambitious concerns that Scott was referring to in his remarks, because these are real problems. PPPs are complex enough anyway, and there's now a mountain of guidance available around the world about how best to implement them. So governments need to think very hard about how to set their own standards and make them work. And then thirdly, as they do so, they need to convert them into accessible, usable guidance documents, which will help steer the market in the right direction, which people can draw on, just as they've done with so many countries have done with PPPs generally. The UK was a very good example of how a government can set about publishing valuable guidance, showing the world how its system can work. That was the system of PFI, which has now been formally closed down, although PPPs continue to happen in the United Kingdom. And I think there'll be a huge resurgence of them there. But these things need to be translated into usable and helpful guidance documents. As that happens, it needs to be done on the basis of very extensive public consultations, because this isn't about government dictating terms to the private sector. This is a very sophisticated business, and it's about ensuring that the private sector, other participants, other stakeholders have sufficient buy-in to the process to make it work properly. And so really, and that means very extensive consultations with contractors, banks, lenders, other market participants over a period of months or even years, so that there's maximum buy-in. The system needs to be as transparent as possible. It needs to be acceptable to private sector investors, and it needs to be practical. And so finally, my last point is that I think this is a golden opportunity for UNECE to provide guidance now. GPP is an idea whose time has come. As Steven said in his opening remarks, time is desperately short. There's a crying need for guidance around the world, particularly in the context of emerging markets. As the EU has shown, many so-called developed economies now know what they're doing in this field. Many emerging market countries don't, as Scott was saying, and as our speaker from Romania was saying. And so this is a great opportunity for UNECE to provide detailed guidance in this area, and a set of model documents, model procedures, or perhaps a model policy paper on the subject, and a set of model robust criteria which governments can draw on and imitate as they think best. That's the end of my remarks. Hope that I didn't go on for too long. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Christopher. Scott, did you wanted to react because you were?
Yeah, no, I just thought, well, first everyone's made.
1 minute, Scott.
That's fine. I'll go very fast. No, I think it's everyone's made very good comments. I think there's a lot of complex issues related to green procurement. I think the focus a lot of times is on stage one, right? The planning, preparation, identification of needs, specifications, all that, the procurement, tendering process. In fact, a lot of what I think the unifying bodies of UNCITRAL and UNECE have focused on are those first two steps. And I have a bit of a prediction that I think the policy debate, and I think that's technically what we're still focusing on here in policy.
Well, that was the last question.
GPP is on stage three. It's the long-term operation maintenance, life cycle renewal. It's, how do these projects actually perform? And if you think about a green procurement process, it's supposed to produce a project, a facility, a service that's green and sustainable for a long period of time. And given that most projects are 20 or 30 years in length, you need to have flexibility in that contract. You need to have points of reset and revisiting terms and conditions that you want to come back on. Perhaps they've met all the initial goals that you've set out for them, and you want to reset and drive them further, right? It's a long-term partnership. So a quick point on that. And I think the second piece that I really need to focus on, because it came up in some recent projects, is, and this is a policy aspect that we didn't anticipate, and I don't think most people do. And I started my talk with people and data. Data at the outset to prepare the project well, et cetera, understand what specifications you want to put in there, type of project you want. But in the long term, for example, on a bus project, buses were to be monitored and to perform in a very specific way. And there's all kinds of environmental data that was going to flow back into the government, that was going to be commingled with user information, user information, ridership, all kinds of other data that was collected and held by a third party. How is that data aggregated? Where does that data go? We found out that some of the data was being held on servers in another part of the world. What kind of cross-border issues do you have and privacy issues? Was the government capable of even taking that data in and making sense of it? What kind of protocols did the government have? Who could access that information? How could it be leveraged by this ministry or that ministry? When they did not normally, the environmental ministry wanted to know how the buses were performing. The revenues and treasury folks want to know how much money we were making and where we're going to make our payments. So there were all kinds of policy issues, even to the point of human rights issues of privacy of the citizens in the usage data coming out of these projects. And so, we talk about, sustainability. Well, there's all these sort of issues at the tail that you have to sort of pay attention to and take into account at a very early stage. So the complexity, I would say, does lend itself to a PPP. You need expertise to parse through all these different issues that are going to come up over the life of a long-term project. And I just encourage you, maybe as my takeaway, is pilot a project. Don't try to be too ambitious. Do one, set some green standards, some green expectations and goals, see how it works. Pilot it in very specific sectors. Go through that process. Learn your way through this, and then I think you will slowly develop a much more GPP robust program.
Yeah, step by step. And this is also what we are doing with this panel. I think today it was a very good meeting, because we are basically setting the scene. And on the 25th of May, we will continue the discussion in Geneva during the 15th session of the UNECE Committee on Innovation, Competitiveness and Public-Private Partnerships, because we will then have the same panel, and we will continue the discussion and move on and go into the debate, because of course clearly a lot of things still need to be discussed and debated. So I really like this idea of going step by step. But on the other hand, I think UNECE and the Working Party on PPPs has an important agenda with this topic. And with that, I want to close this panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve, Christopher.
Thank you, everyone.